She was standing at the altar in a white dress when the doors swung open, and the most dangerous man in the city walked in like he owned the place. Because he did. Reese Caldwell had spent 11 months planning this wedding. She had folded every napkin herself, arranged every centerpiece with her own hands, and pressed her dress 3 times in the morning just to make sure the hem sat perfectly. She had done everything right. She had loved Donovan Price for 4 years. Believed every word he said. Defend him to her mother when her mother said his eyes were too comfortable with lies. She had trusted him completely. Which is exactly why she had no idea that 6 days before their wedding, he had signed her name on a property transfer document. Her name. On a house that wasn't even legally his to sell. The house on Maple Hill, the one her grandmother had paid off brick by brick, the one her mother had raised her in, the one that held every birthday, every storm, every late-night cry, every quiet Sunday morning, had been sold. Cash. No conditions. And the man who bought it had just walked through the back doors of Grace Community Church in a black suit that cost more than the entire wedding. Kwon Sung-han. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The whole room went still on its own, like the air itself had decided to give him space. His eyes swept the pews once, calm, unreadable, and then they landed on the woman in the white dress standing at the altar. Reese felt it before she understood it. That feeling when something irreversible has already happened, and the world just hasn't told you yet. Pastor Gerald cleared his throat. Donovan's jaw tightened. And Kwon Sung-han folded his hands behind his back and simply waited. He hadn't come to stop a wedding. He had come to collect. Before we go any further, if you're new here and you love stories that pull you in and don't let go, make sure you hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what Reese is about to discover about the man she almost married is going to shake you. Let's get into it. Reese woke up at 5:47 in the morning on what was supposed to be the best day of her life. The house on Maple Hill was quiet in that particular way it always was before sunrise. A soft, held breath kind of silence that she had loved since childhood. She lay still for a moment listening to it, watching the pale light gather slowly outside the curtain. Her mother Gloria had slept there the night before. The two of them had sat up past midnight eating leftover pasta and laughing about nothing, the way they used to when Reese was in high school. It had been one of those rare sweet nights where everything felt uncomplicated. She got up, wrapped herself in a robe, and padded down to the kitchen. Gloria was already awake, standing at the stove with her reading glasses on, moving a wooden spoon slowly through a pot of grits. The coffee was made. The table was set for 2. A small vase of fresh gardenias sat in the center, Reese's grandmother's flower. "Sit down," Gloria said without turning around. "You're not going anywhere fast." Reese sat. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and watched her mother move around that kitchen the way she always had, like she was part of the walls themselves. Gloria Caldwell had grown up in this house, had buried her own mother from the front porch, had raised Reese in these rooms. Every scratch on the baseboards meant something. Every creak in the floorboards had a name. "You nervous?" Gloria asked, setting a bowl in front of her. "A little," Reese admitted. "Not bad nervous. Just aware." Her mother sat down across from her and looked at her with that long, quiet look that mothers have, the one that sees past the surface. "I want you to be sure," Gloria said simply. "I am," Reese said. She believed it then. She believed it completely. After breakfast, Tasha arrived with the hair supplies and a bottle of champagne she cracked open before 9 o'clock without a single apology. The 3 of them filled the small bedroom with laughter and music, and the kind of comfortable noise that makes a house feel alive. It was only when Reese was fully dressed, standing in front of the full-length mirror in her grandmother's room, that her phone buzzed. A notification. A bank alert forwarded from an account she barely checked anymore. The joint account she and Donovan had opened months ago to manage wedding expenses. She almost ignored it. She almost swiped it away. But something, that quiet instinct her mother had always called the body's knowing, made her stop and open it. The account balance read 0. Not just low. 0. And the transaction note beneath it said, "Property conveyance. Closing costs. Maple Hill address." Reese stared at the screen for a long time. Then she heard Tasha calling her name from the hallway, bright and cheerful, telling her the car was outside. She put her phone in her clutch, smoothed the front of her dress and walked out of the bedroom. She didn't tell anyone what she'd seen. Not yet. She needed to look Donovan in the eyes first. But what she found when she arrived at the church wasn't just answers. It was the beginning of something she hadn't seen coming at all. Grace Community Church had never looked so beautiful. White roses everywhere. Candlelight in every corner. The old wooden pews dressed in cream and sage. It was exactly what Reese had imagined, and somehow, standing in the vestibule in her dress with the notification still burning in her chest, it felt completely hollow. Tasha was fixing a loose pin in Reese's hair when she noticed something shift in her friend's face. "Hey," she said quietly. "Talk to me." "Not now," Reese whispered. "Reese." "Tasha." "Not now." Her voice was low but firm. The kind of firm that didn't allow argument. Tasha stepped back and studied her. Said nothing more. A church attendant knocked softly and told them 5 minutes. The processional music would begin shortly. Everything was on schedule. Reese asked for a moment alone. She stood in that small side room by herself, silk dress, fresh flowers pinned above her ear, hands that wouldn't quite keep still, and she pulled up the transaction record again. The address was there in plain text. 4412 Maple Hill Drive. Her mother's address. The house. She searched the buyer's name. Kwan Holdings LLC. She searched further. And then she found the face. Kwan Sunghan. 31 years old. Head of one of the most quietly powerful criminal organizations in the region. The kind of man whose name appeared in court filings that always got dismissed. Whose business dealings were clean on paper in ways that never made sense. Whose photograph, when she found it, showed a man with a face like still water, calm in the way that meant nothing moved on the surface ever. Her hands were shaking by the time Tasha knocked again. "They're ready for you." Reese put the phone away. She lifted her chin. She walked out into the aisle. She found Donovan at the altar looking exactly as he always looked. Composed, attractive, slightly distracted in a way she had once mistaken for depth. He smiled when he saw her. The practiced smile. The one that showed all his teeth. She had 4 steps left before she reached him when the back doors of the church opened. The sound was not loud. Just the soft weight of heavy doors giving way to something heavier than air. And every head in that room turned. Every single one. Kwan Sunghan walked in unhurried, flanked by 2 men who stayed close without crowding him. He wore black. No tie. He looked like he had never once in his life been somewhere he didn't intend to be. His eyes moved through the room once, measuring, assessing, and then they found Reese. He stopped. She stopped. The entire church seemed to stop with them. And Donovan, for the first time since she'd known him, looked genuinely afraid. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. Pastor Gerald clutched his Bible. A flower girl near the front pew pressed herself against her mother. Somewhere to the left, someone's phone clattered to the floor. Donovan's composure cracked first. Not dramatically, not in a way the guests could easily name, but Reese was close enough to see it. The slight falter in his jaw. The way his hand at his side stopped being still. She turned back to look at the man in the doorway. Kwan Sunghan hadn't moved. He was looking at her the way people look at something they've been expecting, not with surprise but with quiet recognition. Like she was a detail in a picture he had already studied. Director Lim appeared from somewhere behind him and leaned in to speak quietly near his ear. Sunghan gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he began walking forward. Not toward the altar. Not toward Donovan. Toward Reese. She held her ground. She didn't know why. Everything in her body told her to move, to speak, to demand an explanation. But something made her stay exactly where she was. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the instinct that said running would cost her something she couldn't name. He stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, he was taller than she'd expected. And quieter. Not the silence of someone withholding something. The silence of someone who already knew they didn't need to explain themselves. "Miss Caldwell," he said. His voice was even low. Accented lightly. Nothing performed about it. "You bought my mother's house," she said. "I did. Without her knowledge. Without your fiancé's honesty," he corrected. "I bought it the same way it was sold to me. With a signature that wasn't authorized." The room was so quiet she could hear the candles. Donovan stepped forward. "Sunghan. Don't." One word. Donovan stopped like he'd walked into a wall. Sung-han kept his eyes on Reese. He owed me $240,000. He's owned it for 14 months. The property was his offer. I accepted. A pause. I had no reason to investigate the terms of his personal arrangements. Reese looked at Donovan, and for the first time she didn't see charm or comfort or any of the things she had spent 4 years seeing. She saw a man who had taken the one thing she had never offered, the roof over her mother's head, and handed it to a stranger to save his own skin. What do you want? She asked Sung-han. He didn't hesitate. That depends on what you're willing to offer. Her jaw tightened. I'm standing in a wedding dress in the middle of my own ceremony. I don't exactly have options on the table. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but close. You have more options than you think, he said. That's why I'm here. If you're locked in right now, and I know you are, take 2 seconds to subscribe and drop a comment below. Tell me, did Reese walk out with Sung-han, or did she make him earn it? As this story is just getting started. He gave her a choice. Not a real choice, she understood that. Real choices don't happen in front of 200 confused wedding guests with a man in a black suit who legally owns your mother's home. But he framed it like a choice, and she supposed that was its own kind of courtesy. They stepped out of the main sanctuary and into a side corridor. Tasha tried to follow, and Director Lim blocked the doorway with a look so neutral it communicated everything. Tasha stayed. The doors closed. Sung-han stood with his back to the stained glass window at the end of the hall. The colored light fell across his shoulder, amber and blue, and he looked completely unmoved by all of it. The property transfer is finalized, he said. Legal and recorded. There is nothing to reverse. I know that, she said. Your mother has 30 days before the transition of tenancy would be required. Reese kept her expression even. What's your offer? Come to dinner with me tonight. She stared at him. That's it. That's the beginning, he said. I deal in long arrangements, Miss Caldwell, not transactions. You walked into my wedding for dinner. I walked into your wedding, he said, because your fiancé has been avoiding my calls for 6 weeks, and I wanted to make clear to him that avoidance has consequences. He paused. Meeting you was not something I planned. She studied his face. There was nothing slippery about him. No flattery, no manipulation she could easily name. Just directness. Clean and cool as February. And if I come to dinner, she said carefully, what does my mother's house look like on the other side of that? That depends on how the conversation goes. You're not going to give me a guarantee. I don't give guarantees, he said. I give results. Those are different things. Reese looked down the hall. Through the closed door she could hear the low murmur of the guests, the shuffling, the confusion, the quiet chaos of 200 people trying to understand what had just happened to a wedding they had dressed up for. She thought about her mother's kitchen, the grits this morning, the gardenias in the vase. She looked back at Sung-han. If I come to dinner, she said, Donovan doesn't come within 50 feet of that house. Tonight or any night after. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprising. Something quieter than surprise. That, he said, I can guarantee. She held his gaze for a long moment. Fine, she said. Dinner. She turned and walked back toward the sanctuary to tell 200 people that the wedding was over. She didn't look at Sung-han again, but she felt him watching her the whole way down the hall. And what she hadn't admitted yet, not to herself, not to anyone, was that she wasn't entirely afraid of it. He sent a car at 7. Not a driver with the sign. A black car with tinted windows appeared at the curb outside Tasha's apartment, where Reese had gone after she'd packed a bag from Maple Hill and kissed her mother on the forehead and told her not to worry in a voice she hoped was more convincing than it felt. Tasha had stood in the doorway of her guest room with her arms crossed, and her expression walking the line between angry and terrified. You don't have to do this, she said. I know, Reese said. Then don't. Tasha. She pulled her friend into a hug before Tasha could argue more. I'll call you tonight. The restaurant was on the 43rd floor of a building downtown. Private elevator. No other diners. The whole floor had been cleared. Whether for privacy or for power, she couldn't be sure. Maybe both. Sung-han was already there when she arrived. He stood when she walked in, which surprised her. She hadn't expected manners. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she answered. "A lot of people say things." She sat across from him at a table by the window. The city spread out below them, all light and distance, the kind of view that made everything happening at street level feel very far away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You should know," she finally said, "that I'm not afraid of you." "I know," he said. "And I'm not interested in being managed." "I noticed that at the church," he said. There was something in his voice, not quite warmth, but close enough to it that she registered it. The food came in courses she hadn't ordered. All of it was exact, nothing excessive, nothing performative. Like the meal had been built for the conversation, not the other way around. She asked him how he'd come to buy properties. He told her, calmly. No apology for what he was. She asked him about the debt. He told her that too, that Donovan had come to him 2 years ago with a gambling problem and a smooth story, and that Sunghan had been patient far longer than the situation had merited. "Why?" she asked. "Why extend that kind of patience to someone like Donovan?" Sunghan was quiet for a moment. "Because I was told he was going to marry someone worth the consideration," he said. The table went still. Reese looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "that someone in my organization recognized your name and told me some things about the Caldwell family that made me interested in the situation long before the debt became a problem." She set down her fork. "Who?" she asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a photograph across the table. Reese looked at it, and her blood went cold. The photograph was old. Not antique old. More like 15-16 years. The colors had that slight warm fade of film developed too late. It showed the front of the house on Maple Hill, the porch, the old oak to the left, the chipped mailbox her grandmother had painted cream every spring. And standing in the yard, 2 people. Her grandmother, Odalise Caldwell, and a man Reese didn't recognize. They weren't posing. They were laughing about something, the comfortable, unguarded way of people who had known each other for a long time. The man in the photograph was older than the one across from her. But the resemblance was unmistakable. "Your father," Reese said. Sunghan nodded once. "How did they?" "She ran a community lending circle for 20 years. She helped fund my father's first import business when no bank would touch a Korean immigrant with a $700 capital base and a dream." He paused. "She asked for nothing in return. He spent the rest of his life considering that a debt." Reese sat back in her chair slowly, trying to hold all of it at once. Her grandmother, Odalise Caldwell, who had made biscuits every Sunday and kept a Bible on the nightstand and never once mentioned the name Kwan to anyone. "She never told me," Reese said quietly. "She told my father she didn't want it to be complicated," Sunghan said. "She said kindness should be clean." Something about those words hit her somewhere soft. Because that was exactly what her grandmother sounded like. Clean kindness. That's what she had preached her whole life. "So you've known about my family," Reese said carefully. "For a long time," he confirmed. "When Donovan Price brought the deed to that property and put it on my desk, I recognized the address before I finished reading the page." He looked at her steadily. "I did not buy that house to take it. I bought it because it was the only way to stop it from going somewhere worse." She stared at him. "You were protecting it." He didn't answer immediately, which she was beginning to understand was its own kind of answer. "What happens to the house now?" she asked. "That," he said quietly, "is what I wanted to discuss with you in person." He told her then. All of it. His plan for the property. The document he had already had drawn up. One that would transfer the deed to Gloria Caldwell outright. No mortgage, no lien, no condition beyond one. Reese listened. Then she said, "What's the one condition?" He looked at her across the candlelight. "That you stay," he said. "Not as a captive. Not under any force. But because I am asking you, honestly, which I understand is a strange word for a man in my position, to give this a chance." Reese didn't answer that night. But she didn't leave either. She stayed in the guest suite of his building for 3 days before she admitted to herself that she wasn't looking for a reason to go. It wasn't comfort that kept her. His home was clean, quiet, beautifully cold in the way that spoke more of discipline than warmth. There were no decorations that told stories. No photographs on shelves. Everything had been chosen for function and quality, not memory. It was the home of a man who had learned not to display softness in places where it could be used against him. But he wasn't cold to her. That was the thing she hadn't expected. She had walked into dinner bracing for power plays and veiled threats, the kind of transactional choreography she assumed men like him ran as a matter of habit. Instead, she found someone who knocked before entering a room she was in, who asked rather than directed, who once stood in the doorway of the library for 3 full minutes without speaking because she was in the middle of a page and he didn't want to interrupt. She called her mother every morning. Gloria was steady in the way she always was, still at Maple Hill, still tending her plants, still cooking for 2 even when she was alone. Reese told her as much truth as she could without frightening her. Her mother listened, asked careful questions, and on the second morning said something that settled quietly in Reese's chest for days afterward. Baby, a man who protects what somebody loves, that's a different kind of man than the one who sells it. On the third evening, Sung-han found her on the terrace. The city was lit up below. She had her arms folded against the night air, and a cup of tea going cold in her hand. He stood beside her without touching her. You're thinking about leaving, he said. I'm thinking about staying, she corrected. A beat. Those aren't the same thing, he said carefully. No, she agreed. But I've been thinking about both. He was quiet for a while. She appreciated that he didn't rush the silence. I need you to understand something, she finally said. I spent 4 years in a relationship where I trusted the wrong person. Completely. I missed everything. Every signal. Every lie. She paused. I'm not going to do that again with anyone. Not even you. I know, he said. So if you want me to consider this, whatever this is, I need honesty. All the time. Not managed truth. Not careful versions of things. Honesty. He turned to look at her. In the dark his face was harder to read. But his voice was clear. I haven't lied to you once, he said. Not about the house. Not about my father. Not about why I came to the church. I won't start now. She searched his face. One more thing, she said. Name it. Donovan Price never comes near my mother's house. Never comes near my mother. Never gets another minute of my life or hers. Already handled, he said. She turned back to the city. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. I'm staying, she said. For now. Don't make me regret it. And she heard something she hadn't heard from him before. Something low and quiet that might have been a laugh. She filed that away. Something to understand later. 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Director Lim appeared at the door of Maple Hill with a folder. Gloria Caldwell opened the door in her housecoat and reading glasses, looked at the neat young man on her porch and said, You look like you've never eaten a proper meal in your life. Come in. Director Lim, by all accounts, was not a man who followed unexpected instructions. But something about Gloria's voice didn't leave room for argument. He came in. She made him sit at the kitchen table. She put a plate in front of him. She poured coffee. And only once he had taken 3 bites did she look at the folder in his hands and say, Is that for me? Yes, ma'am. She opened it. She read it slowly, the way people read things they need to understand fully before they respond. Her eyes moved over the pages twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked at the window above the sink for a long, still moment. The house is mine, she said. Not a question. Free and clear, Director Lim confirmed. Registered with the city as of this morning. And my daughter? He hesitated. Just barely. Miss Caldwell as well. Gloria nodded once. She reached across the table and picked up a pen from the ceramic cup near the fruit bowl. The cup that had been there since Reese was 6 years old, and she signed where she was directed to sign. Then she looked at Director Lim over her reading glasses. You tell him, she said, that Odalise Caldwell's granddaughter has good sense and a strong backbone, and that if he doesn't treat her right, he'll have to answer to me. Director Lim, who had sat across from federal prosecutors without blinking, nodded very carefully. Yes, ma'am. He reported it back to Sung-han word for word. Sung-han read the message twice, set it down, stood at the window of his office for a full minute. Then he went to find Reese. She was in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled up, doing something with flour that had already escaped onto the counter in 3 directions. She turned when she heard him, raised an eyebrow at his expression. "What happened?" she asked. He handed her a copy of the document. She read it. Her jaw shifted. Her eyes went bright in a way that she didn't try to hide. "My mother's house," she said. "Yours. Hers. However you want to hold it." She looked at him. "You didn't have to do this today." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." She stood with the document pressed flat against her chest, eyes a little full, chin lifted the way people lift it when they're trying to keep themselves together. He didn't move toward her. He waited. And then she crossed the kitchen and hugged him. Not carefully, not politely, but the full, real kind of hug that doesn't calculate anything. He stood still for a moment, like a man who hadn't been touched without condition in a very long time. And then he held her back. The flour on the counter was still everywhere. Neither of them moved to fix it. 3 months later, Reese moved to Maple Hill. Not to leave Sunghan, but to take care of Gloria while her mother recovered from a surgery she'd been postponing for 2 years, finally scheduled now that the weight of the house was off her shoulders. Reese set up the back bedroom, planted new gardenias in the front garden, and fell back into the old rhythms of that house like they had never stopped. Sunghan drove out every Thursday evening. He didn't make an event of it. He appeared, usually around 6, usually with food from somewhere her mother immediately approved of. Gloria would set the table with the good plates. The 3 of them would eat and talk and sometimes not talk at all, and it was the kind of quiet that has texture to it, the kind that builds rather than empties. Tasha came by one Saturday and found him helping Reese fix a broken section of the back fence. She stood at the gate for a long moment watching him work, rolled sleeves, sawdust on his forearms, focused in the calm, unhurried way he did everything. She looked at Reese. "Okay," she said. "I see it." Reese handed him a nail without looking up. "Took you long enough." Donovan Price was not a part of any of this. He had been quietly but thoroughly removed from every space he had occupied. The apartment he'd leased in their shared names, the accounts, the social circle he'd built on the edges of Reese's life. No confrontation. No drama. Just the methodical closing of every door he had counted on staying open. Whether that was Sunghan's doing or simply the natural consequence of what Donovan had done, Reese didn't ask. She didn't need to. On a Thursday in October after dinner, she and Sunghan sat on the front porch the way she and her mother always had. The oak tree had started to turn. The neighborhood was quiet. "My grandmother would have liked you," she said. He looked at her. "She liked honest people," Reese continued, "even when the honesty was complicated. She used to say the shape of a person's character isn't what they do when it's easy." She paused. "It's what they do when they think nobody's watching." Sunghan was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you think she would have seen?" Reese looked at the yard. The gardenias she'd planted. The lights still on in the house behind them. "Someone worth knowing," she said. He reached over and covered her hand with his. Said nothing. Didn't need to. And Reese let herself feel it. Really feel it without bracing, without measuring the distance to the nearest exit. The realness of it. The weight and warmth. She was sitting on her grandmother's porch, in a house that was hers again, next to a man who had chosen to protect something before he had reason to. She had not planned any of this. But she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Reese Caldwell walked into her own wedding and walked out into a life she hadn't imagined. She lost the man who had spent 4 years performing love, while quietly dismantling everything she trusted. She gained something she hadn't thought to ask for. A home returned, a truth told plain, and a man who showed her action by action that care doesn't always arrive in the shape you expect it to. The house on Maple Hill still stands. Glorious plants are blooming. The old oak by the fence is still there. And every Thursday evening, a black car parks quietly at the curb, and the man who once walked into a church like he owned the air inside it knocks on a front door, and waits. Some people said Reese should have walked away. Should have been smarter. Should have been more careful. But here's what they didn't understand. She was being careful. She was being the most careful she had ever been. She wasn't choosing comfort or convenience. She was choosing someone who told her the truth before he had anything to gain from it. That's a rare thing in this world. And Reese Caldwell, woman of sense and strong backbone, knew exactly what to do with something rare. She held on to it. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of what Reese went through and found yourself rooting for her the whole way, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Like the video if Sunghan earned your respect by the end. And drop a comment below. I want to know. At what moment did you know Reese was going to stay? Tell me. I read every single one. See you in the next story.